Anything jump out that you might have some questions on, and we'll go from there.
Sleeping, chapter 4, just in general. Sleeping
Let's start with chapter 4, just so that we can go ahead and go in order.
Can you do single member district?
Single member district. This actually, single member and proportional representation were kind of together. And if you remember with the single member district, this is kind of like the American system. So we'll have maybe 3 candidates running for office, and then it was called the first past the post. So you didn't necessarily have to get a majority of the vote, but you had to get the most votes in order to get elected. So Enrique, let's say that you were running against Kevin, and y'all were also running against Lindsay. And let's say that you got 48% of the vote. Let's say that Kevin got 47% of the vote. Let's say that Lindsay got 5% of the vote. Okay, you didn't get a majority, you got the most, so you won. But technically speaking, that means that 52% of the people voted against you, which technically means that 52% of the vote kind of got wasted, you know, when you put it in that context. Proportional representation is more of what you see in a lot of European systems. And instead of Enrique versus Kevin versus Lindsay, with you winning and Lindsay finishing in really far last place, the basic idea is, under a proportional representation system, is it's going to be about parties. So if you remember, it might be party A, party B, party C, and there wouldn't be your names that are on there. And let's say that we do the same thing again. Let's say that you get 48, let's say that party B gets 47, and let's say that party C actually comes in distant last. Well, if there's 100 seats in the new legislature, then that means that party A is going to get 48, party B is going to get 47, party C is going to get 5. In other words, it matches, and very little of the actual votes are wasted. If we turn it around, and let's say that it was 49 to 47 to 4, well, basically the way that this works, you typically need to get a quorum, not a quorum, you typically need to get a minimum, a threshold, that's the word I'm looking for. And the threshold is typically 5%. So with party C, Lindsay's party, they didn't get the threshold. That means that they're not going to get any seats, and then these other seats would be redistributed, say, between the other 2 parties. But even in that case, now you've got 4% of the vote that got wasted, whereas in the single member, you remember it was 52% wasted. Of course, in a single member, you typically are just going to get 2 parties. So votes are wasted, but somebody is going to get a majority. In this other, because it's proportional, you could have 5 or 6 parties in the government. One of them is not going to get a majority, and it becomes a lot harder to govern. So in a single member district, it's wasteful for the votes, but it's easier to govern. In a proportional system, it's more representative of the votes, but it's harder to govern because you've got more parties that are in there.
Wait, but like in America, even though I guess like the Republican Party won in this election, don't the Republicans and the Democrats both proportionally represent the United States?
Well, they ultimately what you end up seeing is that in a single member district, and we're talking about United States system, you get to vote for a person.
Yeah.
So remember, it was Enrique versus Kevin versus Lindsay, with Lindsay finishing really far in last. Okay, in a proportional system, all you're really voting for is parties. And then the party will pick the people that ultimately, you know, sit in there. So it's a little bit different. And, you know, with a single member, the Republicans won a majority of the seats of Congress, so they won a majority of the single member districts, is basically how that breaks down.
So it's not like a president or a prime minister?
Yeah, this isn't like a president. This is talking about just the legislature, talking about the Congress, a state legislature, this kind of a thing. What else have y'all got? Sean, I think I started to see you raise your hand.
Well, mine was about 10 to 3, so I put it down.
Okay. Any others?
The polity, what is that?
The polity.
Yeah.
The polity, yeah. Okay, I had introduced class with political science, politics, politicians, and polity. And I believe polity was the last one that we had gone through. And polity is basically a like-minded group of individuals. It's a like-minded group of individuals. And I had given you a couple of examples of this. You could argue that the like-minded group of individuals could be in favor of something. You could argue that they are in agreement to be against something. And you remember the article that I had given y'all that dealt with polity? I think I gave you 2. One was, I believe, the Washington NFL team name. and we were talking about whether that was a racist name or not. And in fact, anytime you start talking Washington football, and I'm not talking about stupid soccer, but when you talk about Washington football, inevitably it seems like you hear this controversy when the team is doing badly, and fans are not going to think so, and maybe other groups are. The other example that I had given y'all of this, and I don't know if you remember it, was the taco stand article. Do y'all remember the taco stand article? Because the taco stand article was the one, and this was the one that came from Gwinnett County, Georgia, if you remember. And in that article, they had an extreme surge in Hispanic folk moving into this suburb of Atlanta, and they didn't like it, so they attempted to ban the taco stands, thinking that if you ban the taco stands, then the community would go away. And the example of polity is all of the laws in that article that dealt with things that dealt with Hispanic folk. So if you remember, it was banned in the taco stands. It was, you have to speak in English when you order in a restaurant line. It was, oh golly, that one about forbidding people from sitting on their front porch, and I believe that one was in Kansas, and the article says, because that's what Hispanic folk do. And I'm not making generalizations, I'm just quoting the article, but there were about 5 or 6 laws that they had in there that demonstrated that there was a suspicion against maybe people that look different from the traditional population. So that's what that one was. Politicians. Politicians, if you remember, were people that were in and around government. And I had given y'all the child labor article. And I don't know if, in fact, you're going to remember this, but the politician that we were referring to was actually Newt Gingrich. And if you remember, and there's a video link about this, he had suggested that in inner city schools in particular, it would be a good idea to put young children to work to re-establish the work ethic. Now, there were other people out there that said, oh my God, how can you do this? I mean, some folks would say getting a head start on a trade and on the invaluable lessons one gains from doing any job well would actually benefit everybody. Others would say if you start having kids cooking or being janitors, they do dangerous work, corrosive chemicals, running the heating system. I mean, this really isn't a very good thing. And this was kind of the debate, you know, as far as the child labor was concerned, whether it should be allowed or not. And I believe y'all were surprisingly divided on that as we were discussing this. Surprisingly, it was closer than I was thinking it was going to be. But Gingrich was the example. And if you remember the very first article that we did, it was the acid article. Remember that? Islamic retribution. The idea that ultimately in an Islamic court, and this isn't a legal court, but this would be a religious court, you could in fact, what's that old phrase? Do unto others as you have done do unto others, oh God, I can't even quote the Bible. Somebody help me. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. And this is all on camera. Wow, that's terrible. But you'll notice up here, in this instance, this was Barami, and she actually was trying to stave off a male suitor. And when she was trying to stave off the male suitor, said, hey, I'm betrothed to someone else. He threw acid on her face, blinded her, disfigured her. Do y'all remember the issues from this?
He ruined her life forever.
Okay, yeah, he did ruin her life forever. Other issue, go ahead.
She was a photographer?
What's that?
She was a photographer?
She was actually a photographer, and if she's blind, she's not going to be able to do that anymore. Go ahead.
And she decided that she couldn't end up pouring the acid on the guy, so she lost
Well,
money.
before we get to that, what did she want to do?
Pour acid on his eyes.
Yeah, if he threw acid on her, she actually went to a religious court. Remember, do unto others. She went to a religious court ultimately to be able to pour acid on him. And this was very highly unusual. Why? Because women didn't typically win these kinds of cases, but she did. She did win this case. And do you remember how they told her that she could drop the acid?
5 drops in the
5 drops.
Yeah.
5 drops is right. Anything else you can tell me?
On one eye.
On one eye. 2 men's eyes, no, 2 women's eyes are equal to 1 man's eye is what the court said. So it's kind of interesting. One of the issues in this was she won a case that typically women don't win, but even in winning the case, on appeal, it got knocked down to 2 women's eyes is only equal to 1 man's eye. So she won a case to be able to drop 5 drops of acid in his eye. Of course, he would have been medicated and whatnot, but yeah, he's going to see this coming, and it wouldn't have been quite the same. Did she end up doing it? She didn't end up doing it. And when she didn't end up doing it, it ultimately came down that she lost all of the other elements of her settlement. So she didn't get any money out of it. She didn't, get the retribution. And that's the thing on this. Islamic retribution. If somebody does something to you, then in fact you, under this retribution idea, have the ability to do the same thing back. So if he hit her with acid, then she should be able to drop acid on him. Some people said that this wasn't justice, but rather this was revenge. But the key thing on this was that ultimately she didn't do it. Really give this article a read over, because at the beginning we did spend a reasonable amount of time on this. Do y'all see anything else in chapter 4 that, go ahead, Sean.
Plurality.
Plurality. This is what we were talking about with Enrique before. Okay, a majority is going to be 50% plus 1, but in those single member districts you can win with a plurality, which means you got the most even though you didn't get a majority. What else have y'all got?
That's statism? Or that?
Statism, yeah. I gave y'all that first belief quiz, and somehow I got lucky and remembered to bring this today. And I'll probably scan this in today so that you can have a look at it. But it was the regulation and redistribution quiz. One of the things that dictates a lot about a government is if you know how much they're going to be interested in regulating the economy and how much they're going to be interested in redistributing the economy. And if you remember on here, there were the 4 categories. Laissez-faire, to allow one to do. And the idea with laissez-faire was government should not redistribute money, so I earn me's mine and you earn you's yours. However, government should equally not regulate the economy. Shouldn't tell you how much to make or what kind of jobs. You're talking about statists. And if you remember with the statists are going to believe that government should regulate the economy but should not redistribute. And when we were talking about this, the basic idea is that government may need to tell you how much to produce or what to produce, but you're going to be able to make an awful lot of money if you do what government says. And I had given y'all the example in the statist idea. There were 2 articles. It was the death panel and it was the assisted suicide article. Do y'all remember those?
Yes, I remember this is